We are really excited to have this chance to talk with you. I'm Margaret Levi, the director of the Center for Advanced Study Behavioral Sciences at Stanford, and a professor of political science here at Stanford.
And I'm Ira Katznelson, currently president of the Social Science Research Council, also a professor of political science and history at Columbia University.
Two organizations, very separate, but in an odd way, are similar.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll ask you about your experiences with each of our organizations.
Well, I learned a lot from my association with both. In the case of the Social Science Research Council, they gave me a fellowship that allowed me to do research between my junior and senior year at Princeton.
Pretty remarkable.
And I traveled to the Tennessee Valley Authority region, and my thesis was the agricultural program of the TVA on that. And I remember I went to Washington and I collected a lot of data. And I went to Knoxville, their headquarters, and I collected a lot of data.
And what year was this, George?
This was 1941.
41. Shortly before you joined the Marines.
Yeah. Well, it was my pretty much junior and senior year. So then, for some reason, I went to a demonstration area where the TVA had this program of providing fertilizer to farmers if they would have practices that would conserve the soil and so on. And I lived with a couple, so-called hillbilly couple, and they had no education. But it quickly was clear to me they were smart as they could be. You don't have to be educated to be smart. And they knew their landscape. First of all, I learned something about interviewing people. You don't start asking a lot of questions. Just sit in the front porch and rock and wait for them to start asking you questions. And then you can ask them questions. To put it another way, any good interviewer knows that you have to get the scene set right if you're going to get answers that are candid and helpful. So I learned that. Then they got enough confidence in me that they said, we'd like your help in filling out these forms. They knew what the government wanted to hear, and they were determined not to lie. On the other hand, they knew that you could present data in various ways and be more appealing to the government. So we worked on that. And then it was a great experience to learn a lot from it. But then I got back to Princeton, and I start looking at these numbers that I had from Washington and Knoxville. And I said to us, these numbers are an accumulation of the kind of forms that I helped fill out. So they're all biased. So one thing I learned after that was, whenever you see a number, ask where it came from. Because numbers give a deceptive appearance of precision and accuracy, and they're not necessarily so. Where did they come from? So I learned a lot from the Social Security, the Social Science Research Council, and giving them that chance to do some field work on my own. I've always felt, and I have encouraged this in others, that any new person in the social science field would benefit a lot by going out and collecting some information yourself. And then you understand it better. I built on this experience when I was at the Council of Economic Advisors, President Eisenhower's council.
Yeah.
Because the man who was head of it, Arthur Burns, was a statistician. He liked statistics. And so we did a lot of work. And in my field, there are lots of time series the government puts out on employment and unemployment and things like that. And so I was encouraged to study those numbers. Where did they come from? They came from interviews. And how did they collect them? How did they do their samples and so on? And I dug into that. And my interviews and that porch in Tennessee Valley were helpful to me. So that's a long spiel, but
no, that's great. It sounds like
that council experience was very formative.
That council experience not only affected how you acted in public affairs, but also how you think of yourself as an economist. Is that right?
That's right. You have to put economics in its place, which is at the top of all the social sciences, but still, it's got to interact. And when you're in office, you don't have economic problems, you have problems.
Right.
And they have all kinds of dimensions, and the economics of it is a critical part, but it's got to be kept in perspective.
So some years later, you come to the Center for Advanced Study. This is more in the middle of your career. You've been on the Council of Economic Advisors. You've been Dean of the Graduate School of Business at the University of Chicago. And you come in 1968, a remarkable year, to the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences. So what was that experience like, and how did that play into what you've learned about the role of social science?
Well, I was really looking forward to the year because some of my close friends and colleagues, Milton Friedman, George Stigler, had been there.
They had indeed.
And they had enjoyed it a lot, felt that they benefited greatly from it. And they all talked about Stanford and the ambiance of living around here. So we rented a house. Some professor who was on leave for the year, we rented that house. So we had a house on the Stanford campus. I remember we drove in with my family, sort of looking around, and got into this house and settled ourselves down. And what a place. How gorgeous. What nice atmospheres. Of course, it was hot. Then we decided to go up to San Francisco. And we turned out it wasn't hot up there.
Yeah, right.
We all had to buy a new sweatshirt. But anyway, it was very nice living. But then the center, I go over to the center, and Meredith Wilson, I think, was the director at the time, and he took me to my study. And it was a nice little room. Had a glass window that looked out on the bay, nice, with a little porch. And there was a desk, and there was a chair and a little settee. And I looked around and I said, "Where's the telephone?" He said, "There isn't any telephone." I said, "Well, I'd be glad to pay for putting in a telephone." He laughed. He said, "We don't have telephones." He said, "If you get a phone call, there's a little buzzer that rings, and you go down the hallway and there's a little booth with a telephone, and you can go in there and take your call." I said, "What if I want to make a call?" He said, "Bring plenty of quarters. There's this payphone over there." And then he laughed. He said, "Try it, you'll like it." And after a couple of weeks, it sort of dawned on me that the first time since I was a graduate student, I was working entirely from the inside out. Mm-hmm. What I was doing every day was whatever I decided to do, not what some phone call provoked me to do. And I liked it. And I decided it caused me to think, in a sense, strategically about my life and what am I trying to achieve here. And it was a wonderful experience from that point of view. And even though I had to leave at the end of 3 months because I went into the cabinet, I achieved a lot. I was working on a book, and I got the book well along. So by the time it got published, before I was very long as Secretary of Labor. So I enjoyed the experience, the fellows. Actually, the lunches are pretty good.
Yeah, they still are.
Not bad. It's a good lunch, and so you sit and talk to people and get to know them. And
so what was it like interacting with that group of people? It was a remarkable class, as we mentioned. So it was David Reisman and Albert Hirschman and Irving Howe and a lot of different people.
They're interesting people to sit and talk to.
Did it affect
it's a kind of a no agenda
yes.
thing. I have a little lunch group that's sort of modeled on it here at Stanford. It consists of Gerhard Casper, Lucy Shapiro. Lucy's a biologist.
A friend of mine.
Any room that she's in, she's the smartest person in the room.
Right.
She's also fun.
Yep.
And Sid Drell, who's a physicist. The four of us meet for lunch periodically, and we have no agenda. We just talk, and it's more fun. It's sort of like the center.
Yeah.
A little mini
and
center.
did that influence your thinking, having that kind of interaction with people who weren't either in government or economists?
Well, it makes you, One of the things I did when I was Secretary of State that's sort of related to it is I had some subject that I saw was going to be important, and I would find who around the country in the scholarly community is really knows something about that subject, and get a hold of that person, and with his or her help, get a little group of 7 or 8 people, and then invite them into the State Department. That we'd start with breakfast on Saturday morning, and we'd go all through the morning, lunch, and into the middle of the afternoon. And my idea was to learn something from them. I would invite colleagues, and I had sometimes to step on my colleagues who were always trying to persuade people that our point of view on some subject is the right point of view. I said, we're not here to persuade them, we're here to learn from them. And let them talk. And our question should be to stimulate hearing them talk on this or that or the other subject. So it was kind of an offshoot of the center experience. Everything isn't just like it may seem in the economics textbook. There are people who are very interesting with different points of view, and you got to listen to them. And I applied that lesson, as I said, when I was Secretary of State. But then there's another lesson I got from the center, because the notion of being there with no duties, nobody's telling me what to do, I just do whatever I want, really causes you to think a little bit. And when I was in office, for instance, when I was Secretary of State, I'd take maybe 3/4 of an hour, not at the end of the day when you're tired out, but middle of the day somewhere, and say to my secretary, if my wife calls or the president calls, put it through. No other calls. And I make a vow to myself not to look at my inbox. And I go sit down in a comfortable chair with a pad and pencil, take a deep breath and say, what am I doing here? What is our strategy? Where are we trying to get? How are we going about it? And it was very helpful to me, because your life, if you don't do something like that, it's chock full of tactical things. Oh, something's going on, and you're coping with it. And if you don't take a little time to get yourself out of that coping atmosphere, you lose sight of where you're really trying to go. I found it, it was like I hear Meredith Willson now, try it, you'll like it, about no telephone. So this was my version of no telephones. And it helped me quite a lot.
One of the current concerns, both at CASBS and the SSRC, concerns the current state of democracy, not just in the United States, but globally, and how we think about current conundrums and anxieties, and what the role of social science ought to be in thinking about contemporary dilemmas associated with the vibrancy and capacities of democratic life. And I wonder if it would be wonderful to have your thoughts on that subject.
I think it's a very important subject right now, particularly. And I've been thinking about it and working at it. And we have a little project going here that the way I think of it is, the problem of governance has become much more difficult because of the information and communication age. People everywhere know immediately what's going on. And everybody has a cell phone, and they communicate and organize, and they do. And the world is full of diversity. And it's been possible earlier to ignore it, or maybe suppress it. But I think that gets harder and harder. So you have to learn how to govern over it. And people aren't onto that. And that's one reason why democratic processes don't seem to be working as well as they did, because people haven't figured out. I had an earlier experience that sticks with me. This was some time ago, 1969. It was my first visit to Israel. And for some reason, I was lucky enough that the iconic mayor, Teddy Kollek, took me over for an evening. He was a terrific guy. And what he did was he took me from one party to another, everybody having a good time, all different. And then we've been to 8 or 9 of these parties. Then he took me into his office, and all of a sudden I realized he's teaching me something. He said, my job as mayor of Jerusalem is to see that Jerusalem is a beautiful picture. But it's not a painting, the way you think of a picture, where the colors merge into each other. My beautiful picture is a mosaic. So you saw these groups tonight. They're all different. My job is to fix it so that they can all express themselves as they want, as long as they do it in such a way that doesn't infringe on somebody else's ability to express themselves, and have them all glad to be living under what he called the Golden Dome of Jerusalem. So he understood he was governing over diversity. He had to let it express itself within some limits, and had to some overall objective that pulled people together. So he understood the problem, and he was really fantastically successful. He did make Jerusalem a beautiful picture in his day. There's a similar story. It goes early in our history. I'm sure you've seen in the Metropolitan Museum the picture of George Washington crossing the Delaware. Everybody's seen that picture. There he is with his vision and his sword, and there's Lieutenant Monroe is holding a flag. Have you ever looked at the other people in the boat? They come to, there are 11 more, so they're 13 in all, and they're all different.
Yes.
There's a woman pulling an oar. There's a black guy there. There are people in different costumes.
Native
And
American.
they're very, very
Native
different.
American as well.
So George Washington was governing over diversity and had the revolutionary objective as his thing that held people together. So it was a brilliant piece of work, and people haven't thought of it that way, but you had to think of it that way, particularly as you went on, because I think it was about 6 years we didn't have a country after the revolution, because the states were so jealous of their prerogatives that they didn't want to have some big overarching federal government telling them what to do. And finally, I think I'm right in saying Madison persuaded Washington to be willing to be the chairman of a convention, and Washington prestige was such that people came. And then they designed a form of government that was totally unique in its day, where you had a national government with limited power. That power checked and balanced. Didn't want anybody with too much authority. But everything that really affected your daily life was left to the states and localities. So it was a way of saying you can have an overall central thing that mainly was for foreign affairs and defense matters. And you can have diversity because everybody can express themselves. We can have Chinatown in San Francisco, and you don't have to have it in Mobile, Alabama. We're different, in different backgrounds, and that's okay. And what has happened over the years is the federal government has gotten more powerful and has gradually moved into this space. Now they're telling us how to run a bathroom, and people are pushing back, saying, get off my back. And that's one explanation, I think, for some of our recent electoral surprises, that people are saying, let us do things our way.
One of the things that strikes me about thinking about that painting of Washington crossing the Delaware is it's also about relative equality. I mean, there's George Washington, who's in charge, he's the general, and Lieutenant Monroe, but the rest are all literally pulling oars or doing something as a collective in which each has a role, and they're not very distinctive in terms of their status, right?
No, they're distinctive in terms of their obvious origins.
Their background.
That's right,
They're
their
dressed
backgrounds.
differently in their background.
But
So there's a great diversity there.
lots of diversity, but relative equality,
Right.
which is another issue that is clearly becoming very important in this country and around the world, is the changes in the perception of equality. I'd love to hear you talk about that and how it might be linked to some issues that we also are studying at both of our organizations, having to do with the changing nature of work, the changing nature of citizenship, the changing nature of a whole bunch of things in which inequality is playing a role.
What you don't like is contrived inequality that happens because society isn't working right.
Right.
And I think that we need to be sure that the basic structures give equality of opportunity. I think one of our big problems in the United States right now is our K through 12 education system. It's not doing anywhere near what it should do for our children, particularly those who are in disadvantaged areas. And it's not because we don't know how to do it. We do know how to do it. We're just not doing it. So
why aren't we doing it? I mean, you're someone who's had just an immense amount of experience in government and
that the schools are administered and thought of as a place that provides jobs.
Mm-hmm.
We have to think of schools as a place that provides education. That's the key. And Jerry Brown, our governor, was once mayor of Oakland. Mm-hmm. And he started out to create what's now called the Oakland Military Institute, OMI. And I was interested and I helped him. He had a terrible time getting it done. The education bureaucracy didn't want to have it happen. But he finally got it into, only because he's a former governor did he manage to get it done. But now it's thriving. It's got lots of kids that come right out of the Oakland neighborhoods that are so poor in the public schools. But every child there goes there because he or she thinks they're going to learn something. And they practically all graduate from high school. Mm-hmm. And they practically all go on to college. It's the same pool. And the key is choice. The kids choose to come. The school knows that if they don't produce a good education, nobody will come. That's their mass. So I think this notion of educational choice is a key. Then I think, I think that a key in practically all dealings is what I call trust is the coin of the realm. Uh-huh. And I was taught this a long time ago by a Marine Corps drill sergeant when I was in boot camp in the Marine Corps at the start of World War II. He hands me my rifle. He says, take good care of this rifle. This is your best friend. And remember one thing. Never point this rifle at anybody unless you're willing to pull the trigger. Mm-hmm. No empty threats. Mm-hmm. Boot camp wisdom. Very important. And it has a coin that you turn that coin over and it says, mean what you say. Do what you say you're going to do. Then people will trust you. And when they trust you, you can deal with them. If there's somebody you don't trust, you don't really can't deal with them very well. But if you trust the other person, then you can do things. And trust is the coin of the realm. And you can build trust even with people who are adversaries. I'll give you an example. When I was Secretary of State, of course, the Cold War issues were big issues. And my counterpart for a good period of time was a man named Edward Shevardnadze. Mm-hmm. And we developed a friendship. And I remember when he was first appointed, first time I met him was at a big meeting in Finland. And my wife and I discussed it, and we said, you know, we're going to have lots of issues. We heard that he was bringing his wife with him. But let's get to know them as people. And my wife had been to a lot of these meetings. I'd go and meet her and help her find the common ground. And I went over and I introduced myself to Shevardnadze, and I said, I've got an idea for you. He said, what's that? I said, tomorrow we have a one-on-one meeting. It'll be in our ambassador's residence. And my idea is each one of us will have a little microphone, and each one of us will have an earpiece. The interpreters will not be in the same room. They'll be in a different room. So they can interpret while each one of us is talking. And while we are talking, I can listen in my language to what you're saying. And it'll be better communication.
Right.
And it'll be use the time more effectively. He said, great idea. And one of his Soviet friends were there, went practically bananas. You don't have to agree to anything, you'd bargain. And he basically said, get down. So we went through it all, the whole day, and I said, well, what do you think? He said, it was terrific. We got twice as much done as we could otherwise getting done. So that went on. We worked with each other and had, I might say, a relationship of trust. So one of our big issues was Afghanistan. We were about to have a meeting where people were going to talk about all the problems. And he said, George, I'd like a little private time with you. So we went into a little back office, and he said, we have decided, past tense, to leave Afghanistan. It has not been announced, but we're going to leave. And I'm telling you this because maybe we can work at this a little bit to minimize the loss of human life as this takes part. Now, he would never have said that if he didn't trust me.
Yes.
Right.
Because he knew I was not going to go out and blare
Right,
out to the press
right.
this and that and that.
Or tweet it.
I would be quiet. I would tell the president, that's all I would tell.
Right.
And we did work on it. It did help from a human standpoint. But
So-
it's an example of trust, and I think that you have to build trust into society. You have to build that's why the rule of law is so important, and why people have to have it. It has to be administered in a way that people have confidence the laws do apply to everybody the same way.
So we only have a few minutes more, and I really want to bring it back in a sense to CASBS and to SSRC. One of the things I hear in what you're saying is that your approach to how you deal with things is very problem-oriented, as opposed to, let's solve this particular problem and let's think about what we need to do it, which is the way both of our organizations really think about how to confront contemporary problems. This isn't an economic problem or a political problem or a sociology problem. It's a problem.
It's a problem. Right.
So I'm just wondering if there is a way you can talk to how the kind of organizations that we're part of are helping to prepare people to do the kind of work and to do in the way that you think about how this work has to be done.
Well, here at Stanford, we're doing this all the time. For instance, some of us have the idea that this is the amount of space that's healthcare. The more of that space we can have prevention as distinct from cure, the better it's going to be for everybody. And this is really the way in which you're going to get control of costs.
Mm-hmm.
So a woman named Lucy Shapiro is a brilliant person, friend, really terrific person, and I have decided to work on this together. And she tells me that the dean of the medical school is now enthusiastic.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking with the president of MIT the other day, and I mentioned this, and he said, oh, we're working on it at MIT.
Yeah.
And I find that Susan Hockfield,
Yes.
who's former president emeritus of MIT, and she and I have worked together on things. And all of a sudden, she and I are on the phone talking, hey, we're going to make a little consortium here. So we're going to work on this problem together.
Oh, wonderful.
That's great.
And it takes you in all sorts of ways. For example, probably one of the most important preventive things we've ever done was our campaign against smoking.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying, let's do a little case study on what happened. How did that take place? Because we're seeing it all over again in drugs. Drugs are killing people.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got to prevent a lot of the problems by persuading people not to take them. So can we learn something from the cigarette that we can apply to the drug issue? And Lucy and I are working on all kinds of things together, and we're gathering more people together. So Stanford is providing a kind of place where there's a lot of expertise in different ways, and we don't have any trouble coming together and identifying problems. We commission papers. We're commissioning a paper, for instance, on the history of prevention. What can we learn?
Mm-hmm.
And so on. And all kinds of things are going on in science and learning how the human body works.
Right.
And there are all sorts of ways in which diagnostics are being improved. So we're going to try to put all this together and develop a program.
Very
What can
important
we
you
do?
come to lunch at the center, because we have two projects that are related to those issues up there now.
Well, we're glad to be invited. But
Consider it done.
Consider it done.
my point
Bring
is
Lucy too.
that Stanford University, and Hoover does this, but we do it not only within ourselves but with the university, provides a setting where there are people with different skills and interests can come together easily and talk about the subject and try to get somewhere on it. Serious, present papers.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another example. When I was in office, President Reagan and I both worried a lot about nuclear weapons. Instead of limiting them, we wanted to reduce them, and we did. We managed to get agreements with the Soviet Union. The number of nuclear weapons in the world today is about a third of what it was at the time of our Reykjavik meeting. But it's turning the other way right now, and we're going in the wrong direction. So we had a little discussion on the subject, and we wound up with, and the headliners were Henry Kissinger and me and Bill Perry and Sam Nunn. And we wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal calling for an end to nuclear weapons and identifying the kind of steps you'd have to take to get there. And it got a lot of publicity, and we made some headway, but now it's not going in the right direction.
Yeah.
So we're continuing to work on that and try to figure out why and try to figure out what approaches can we do. Can we learn something from how we were so successful before that can help us? So there are all kinds of things going on that, and I think the one that governing over diversity in an age of transparency is the way I call it, that you talked about earlier. That's a very important subject.
If I were to summarize this conversation, I would want to record the lesson you've imparted about the centrality of creating institutional frameworks within which these kinds of exchanges can take place, within which trust can be built, both intellectual and personal trust, and institutions that would allow making connections between the world of thought and the worlds of policy and doing, thinking and doing together. And I think both of us, as you know, or our institutions, are deeply committed to this kind of interconnection, providing this kind of setting. And it's so heartening to know that a person of your experience, achievement, and stature has had this kind of robust relationship, not only with our institutions, but with other key institutions, universities, business, international relations institutions that have shaped the prospects that you wished to advance as a scholar and as a statesman. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, really.
Let me tell you a story then to bring this to an end that brings this point to the fore. I tell the story at the start of my book, Learning from Experience. There's an MIT faculty meeting not too long after the war. And this guy Bemis gets up and he says, I'm very pleased to be a member of this great faculty, and shows what my colleagues think of me and what the administration thinks. But maybe better is what a couple of the old timers of a little town in Maine where I grew up think. So a couple of them were sitting by the radio. Announcement comes through. Bemis made a professor at MIT. And one says, I'm not surprised. Right from the first grade, he was a smart kid. The other one says, that's right, that Bemis, he knew more and more all the time. And the other one says, that's right, by this time, that Bemis, he probably knows everything. Another one says, that Bemis, he may know everything, but he don't realize nothing. So there's knowledge and there's realization, and realization is what you get from your experience. And knowledge, in a sense, can be compartmented.
Right.
But realization is about problems and how do you cope? It's broader. So that's the concept. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.